What's up guys, also Footballtalk here. As I mentioned earlier this week, we've arrived at what I consider the actual off-season, where all the key events have pretty much taken place, outside of a few low-budget signings later on, potentially as teams actually get out there and realize which final pieces they still need to add. In this series that I'll be working on over the next month, I want to give all 32 NFL franchises somewhere between 8 and 12 minutes of attention, depending on the size of their draft classes, quickly break down each of the new players, and relate them to what the rest of the roster and the role within it currently looks like. As discussed, we're switching back and forth between NFC and AFC here, moving away along the compass so to speak, which has us talking about the Ravens, Bengals, Browns and Steelers today, after we looked at the NFC North earlier this week. Other than specialists, there's only like 15 players of the 257 guys that got selected that I didn't actually get to watch. I have no problem saying so when they do come up, instead of just making stuff up, but I'll try to deliver insights on what each team added over the course of draft weekend, and kind of reflect on each roster as part of this discussion. And I have even more written draft content with extensive scouting reports over on my site, HelloToFootballtalk.com if you're interested. Since I don't love draft grades, my approach is to finish up each video by giving my personal rankings of what I believe teams are able to accomplish, ranking the 4 teams in each division against each other. Before we get into it, let me quickly ask you that if you enjoy the analysis, hitting the thumbs up really helps me out, and you can follow along with the series by subscribing to our channel if you haven't done so yet. Thanks for that already. The AFC North was one of the strongest divisions collectively, looking at these 4 draft classes in combination with each other I thought. So let's dive right in with the Baltimore Ravens, who started off in the first round 30th overall, with Nate Wiggins, cornerback out of Clemson. Then in the second round 62nd overall, they got Roger Rosengarten, offensive tackle Washington. Third round 93rd overall, Adisa Isaac, edge defender Penn State. A couple of 4th rounders, 113th overall Devontae Walker, wide receiver North Carolina, and 130th overall TJ Tampa, cornerback out of Iowa State. In the 5th round 165th overall Rasheen Ali, running back out of Marshall. 6th round 218th overall Devin Leary, quarterback Kentucky, and a couple of 7th rounders, 228th overall Nick Samick, interior offensive lineman Michigan State, and 250th overall Sanusi Kane, the safety out of Purdue. Starting off with Wiggins at the top, an incredibly loose athlete for the corner position, played a lot of off-man coverage, and his footwork wasn't by the book, yet he'd be able to flip with guys or plant and drive in explosive fashion to trigger against breaks. Has elite recovery speed and those burns in general when he bites on double moves or makes plays off his landmarks in zone coverage. You also see that chasing down plays way down the field at times. Definitely has a slight frame at 6'1", 175 pounds, and you see that show up when he can't quite bring big ball carriers to the ground. But I don't see any issue in terms of willingness to stick his face in the fan and attack downhill against the run. The one thing he really needs to work on is how he approaches the ball. When you see the ability to climb the ladder in high point passes, when he can track their flight, but turning and locating when he's playing with his back to the quarterback, he can't quite access that kind of playmaking yet. Not necessarily the type of corner I generally associate with the Ravens, or someone they've typically valued as much as a bigger physical cover guy, but the aggressive style of play and supreme athletic tools are something any team can buy into. Wiggins was my CB2 and Baltimore gets him with the 3rd to last pick of the 1st round. If they deploy Kyle Hamilton as more of a traditional safety deep this season with the loss of Geno Stone, I think Marlon Humphrey moves back into the slots and Wiggins starts outside, or the rookie works his way into the rotation and becomes a quasi-starter by mid-season, similar to what it looked like for Humphrey. I mock tackled the Ravens in the 1st round for the most part, but they addressed that position in the 2nd with Roger Rosengarten out of Washington, who has some good pop in his hands and impressive 40-ray agility to execute scoop or reach blocks. He can alter his pass sets in different ways, whether he has to speed up his feet against guys that threaten the corner, or dig his cleats into the ground in anticipation of power rushers. And he maximizes his length in the way he makes guys take wider paths around him or baits the hands of rushers by faking the punch. His leggy build becomes challenging trying to create leverage in the run game as more of a waist bender and hunkering down against powerful defenders trying to come at him, while his footwork and weight distribution in pass pro particularly can be kind of all over the place right now, even if there's a lot of different ways to approach guys. So I set him way down as my OT16 in a very strong class, and generally look at this as more of a reach, but there were only 10 guys off the board at that point, and I'm guessing the Ravens just felt like they needed to get him here if they didn't want to miss out altogether. Things come down a little bit from that point onwards as it gets to the tackle position, and this isn't in the mold of what the Ravens typically do, but I also know I'm significantly low on the player, and that some people mocked him at the end of the 1st round even, so he'll probably compete for the right tackle spot with Daniel Falele and Josh Jones, even if I expect there to be some definite growing pains. In the third, then with Isaac, the edge of the Penn State, who plays with good leverage in the run game and has some real jolt in his hands to stand up tackles while absolutely pummeling tight ends. Packs an effective dip and rip move as a pass rusher and just keeps working the hands to win the corner, yet technically can also crash through the tackle's inside shoulder and move the quarterback off the spot. And this guy's just relentless in the way he continues to chase after the ball, whether he has to work through or run contact, getting involved in way more tackles than he probably should in theory. Generally more of an average athlete without any special trait that stands out to you as you watch him, and he loses his balance way too much where he ends up on the turf as he's trying to corner his rushers or gets banged around on the inside. More an AFC North player, I'd say, maybe not in terms of raw size, but the mindset that he plays with. Penn State's defense was loaded with talent across the entire unit, especially up front, but on a play-to-play basis, nobody showed up more routinely and provided an incredible hustle in the way that Isaac did. It's an interesting edge room now for Baltimore, but you still have the wily veteran in Calvin Noy, paired with a couple of young guys who have that explosion up the field, Dafe Owe and David Ojabo. I believe Isaac immediately earns a significant role and plays around 400 to 500 snaps, especially when he provides on early downs. That brings us to day 3 with a couple of 4th rounders. Taz Walker, the North Carolina wide receiver. As a Ravens fan, this one really hurt, seeing UCF's Javon Baker come off the board a couple of picks earlier, and then coming up for Walker, who I had way low on my board. You'll love the profile at 6'2", 200 pounds, with 4.36 speed, a 40.5-inch vertical and nearly 33-inch arms, where he can run by people or elevate to win the ball through contact in the air, but definitely more of a drifter in terms of route running and a clap attack artist who dropped nearly 10% of his catchable targets over the past 2 seasons. So I think there'll be some frustrating moments early on for a team that beyond the top 3 has deficiencies in terms of receiver talent. The element of speed in the perimeter is something they definitely needed to build upon, but when I see him drop a perfectly placed fade ball by Lamar in October, I'll want to pull my hair out probably. If he can be reliable with his route stems and catching technique, this pick could absolutely pay off in the long run though. I did however love the TJ Tampa pick, the Iowa State corner, long-limbed and explosive athlete at 6'1", 195 pounds, who was very comfortable playing bump and run coverage, packs a ton of force in his hands to impede receivers significantly off the line, along with being able to bait them by faking the jam. You also see that funneling receiver to his safeties in zone, along with having the length and ball skills to attack the ball at his highest point. Pretty high and rather choppy in his back pedal if you ask him to play off, while there's room upwards for how he manages that space in the flats in cover 2, and very much an ankle biter or diver as a tackler, who already missed 17% of attempted stops last season, which will only go up against NFL competition if he doesn't work on it. But I had Tampa as my 45th overall player, and I thought this was a massive steal. He fell this far in part because he couldn't do any of the pre-draft stuff, and when he ran the high 4.5s, that enhances some concerns about scheme limitations, but this guy's a starting corner in the right circumstances, and now the Ravens have him as part of the rotation, where they can employ him in matchup against bigger pass catchers, such as T. Higgins for the Bengals for example, or George Pickens for the Steelers, with how he can physically match and frustrate them. In the 5th, they got the Marshall running back Rashina Lee. I'm a lot lower on this pick, specifically because the Ravens passed and produced Tyrone Tracy, who the Giants selected with a pick right behind them, and he was my RB8, but I don't hate this in a vacuum. I'm not the most mature decision maker as a runner, or someone who will plow through tackles while having a fumbling history and not being a big piece of the Marshall passing game, but the movement skills, the start-stop quickness, veering around bodies in the open field without losing time, and then that sprinter speed when he can really stride it out, make him a big play machine. And while he tore his bicep early on day 2 during Senior Bowl, you saw the quick twitch ability show up in the way they could separate in option routes and caught the ball well, along with some breakaway runs early on day 1. I'm sure they like some of the similar aspects he has in common with Keaton Mitchell, who probably isn't quite ready to start week 1, after shining for them as an undrafted free agent. In the 6th, they got Kentucky quarterback Devin Leary. This is the pick the Ravens got back from trading veteran right tackle Morgan Moses to the Jets, along with moving up 21 spots in the 4th round. My number 10 quarterback, obviously not nearly on the same level as Lamar in terms of the movement skills, but the ball just jumps out of his hand, which I really saw at the combine, measuring up against some of the other high-end quarterbacks in this draft, and he's willing to hang in the pocket to rip throws late with pressure coming in on him. That can also get him in trouble, trusting his arm too much and not always seeing the full picture in zone coverage, but I'll refer to the scouting report at this point for more detail if you want to really check it out. That is over on my site, hello@footballtalk.com. I just like the idea of getting someone like this who also helps the defense get better with what he brings as a scout team quarterback in the mold of a more traditional big arm pocket passer. so maybe not in live action, but on the practice field, he's going to be very useful. And then a couple of 7th rounders, Nick Samick, the center out of Michigan State. Great snap-to-step quickness and capable of getting to extended landmarks in the outside zone run game. Whether it's pulling all the way out to the corner or wrapping him behind guards as a lead blocker, he was routinely used on the move and put some linebackers on the turf. Operates with a wide base, active hands, and good movement skills to slide in front of guys in pass pro. Because he's on the small end of the scale, you see Samick get his weight shifted too far over his toes at times, trying to create that initial momentum in the run game. And he has a tendency of overextending pass pro as well. Someone I watched days ahead of the draft, but I started to really like, and I think the Ravens might have found a backup center in the 7th round that could present excellent value for them. And to produce safeties, Anusi Kane, the one guy from this entire division I didn't get to at all in terms of my film evaluations. Team captain for the Boilermakers, with solid size at 6'1", 210 pounds, a lot of production against the run, even though his missed tackle rate is a little higher than you'd like to see. The key here for him, well over 500 snaps on special teams during his collegiate career, and is probably looked at as a guy to stash in the practice squad, valuing his energy and willingness to race up the field on coverage units. So as I look at this entire class for Baltimore, a little up and down, but I combine to the valleys with how high the peaks were. If Rosengarten can develop into an average start at right tackle, and Tez Walker ultimately as a number 3 or 4 who works on his hands and catches a deep one from Lamar every other week, I can really like what they did here, because they got my number 2 and 8 corner, a worker beyond the edge, a jitterbug to add to that offensive backfield, potentially backups at quarterback and center, along with a core special teamer. That's plenty good. Not quite on the same level as Ravens draft that we've seen in the past, but there were some more questionable picks for me, at least in the first 4 rounds, but they did address the main areas of need and found some great value selections throughout all 3 days. This team lost a bunch of starters and other contributors, but they've done enough this offseason to still be able to compete for the top of the AFC, I believe, and we'll see it right away as they're gonna be facing the Kansas City Chiefs on opening day, as announced a couple of days ago from when I'm recording this. Let's now move on to the Cincinnati Bengals, who in the first round, 18th overall, selected Marius Mims, offensive tackle Georgia, 2nd round, 49th overall, Chris Jenkins Jr., interior defensive lineman out of Michigan, a couple of 3rd rounders, 80th overall, Jermaine Burton, wide receiver Alabama, and 97th overall, McKinley Jackson, interior defensive lineman Texas A&M, 4th round, 115th overall, Eric All, tight end Iowa, 5th round, 149th overall, Josh Newton, quarterback TCU, a couple of 6th rounders, 194th overall, Tanner McLaughlin, tight end Arizona, and 214th overall, Cedric Johnson, edge Ole Miss, and then 2 more 7th rounders, 224th overall, Dejan Anthony, safety Ole Miss, and 237th overall, Matt Lee, interior offensive lineman Miami. Of course, we'll start with the name at the top here and the biggest among the bunch. I've said this before that Mims just looks like Thanos, 6'8", 340 pounds, with seemingly no ounce of fat on his body, just over 36-inch arms and low 11-inch hands. Carries devastating force in those hands and power in his quads combined with the flexibility to put together dominant reps in the run game. And then it's really tough to get around this guy with his massive frame and insane length in pass pro, along with having crazy recovery skills for a guy of his dimensions. Generally, his understanding for how to frame rushers and not present soft edges to them is a work in progress at this point still, in large part due to the lack of live reps with only 8 career starts, and he lacks some consistent temperament in the run game. But man, if someone could get that out of him, this guy could be a monster. While Mims only played at right tackle, he actually practiced pretty evenly between both sides at Georgia. The Bengals now probably have the biggest trio of offensive tackles in NFL history, between him, Orlando Brown Jr. and Trent Brown. Depending on the development plan, I could see the rookie plugging at right tackle, or better yet, they keep him on the shelf for as long as Trent Brown first gets hurt, which I hate to say this, but seems fairly inevitable with his medical history. And then Mims gives you the flexibility down the line to potentially move over to the blind side as well. So a home run pick, I believe, right in line with where I valued him, and if this ends up a top 5 player from this entire draft class, I wouldn't be surprised at all. And the Bengals kept on going with great value finds when they selected Michigan tier defensive lineman Chris Jenkins Jr., son of former Panthers and Jets Pro Bowl D tackle Chris Jenkins Sr. of course, comes out of his stance low and ready to strike with his hands against the run, being able to reset the line of scrimmage and track plays laterally, being able to fall back a gap and zone concepts as well. Was used in that read and react style fronts for Michigan, where they didn't allow him to attack up the field a whole lot, but you see it at moments and he's super active working off contact. While as a pass rusher, he displays an impressive ability to corner his rushes and come free as a looper, along with the suddenness to crossface interior protectors at times. He simply doesn't have much of a pass rush portfolio at this point, largely relying on power and not packing any reliable counters that he can access. and even for the type of front he was part of, he can be a little late off the ball, not mirroring the first steps of the O-line effectively enough. For a team that really suffered in run defense and allowing explosive plays, I think they got themselves potential in the elite run stuffer, especially if we go back to the 2022 tape, when he was allowed to be a little more aggressive in that regard to force the action. They did sign Sheldon Rankings to go along with BJ Hill, and I think the idea here is to be more interchangeable, with who they'll be lining up at the 1-3 technique in this even front, with the departure of DJ Reader, especially as offenses want to shift the strength of the formation shortly before the snap. So I could see Jenkins start ultimately, to keep Rankins fresh on passing downs, which would benefit both sides in terms of where the ice play is currently, but at the very least I think those guys rotate a lot, and since they found themselves a cornerstone piece as this defense is sort of in the transition process still. Next up, Alabama receiver Jermaine Burton. Even in an insanely deep wide receiver class, I outlined this as one of my guys in the video I put out a couple of months ago by now, which you can check out later if you like. That burst for Burton to go from even to a step behind the corner is excellent, indicated by a 1.53 10-yard split that he ran at the combine, along with an average depth of target of just over 20 yards last season. Already packs a diverse release package and understands how to tempo his routes exceptionally well, along with the play strength to fight for contact. And then when the ball is in the air, he has that extra gear that he can access, as well as excellent body control and how he fights for rebounding position to win in contested situations. Not someone who will make people miss a whole lot after the catch, or gives you top tier effort as a run blocker, especially when the ball isn't going his way. And the big thing of course are some character concerns that have been brought up throughout this process, with the departure from Georgia, how that went, and that altercation he had hitting a Tennessee fan. But on the field, you just love the trash talk and that feisty style of play when he's on your side. I think he has the skills to play any of the three spots in the Bengals offense, and as they navigate the decision around T. Higgins, having Burton show up to make big plays when given chances will be key for them. When I think of the classic 11 personnel sets, I still believe it's Chase and T on the outside, while Trent and Irvin or Charlie Jones take over in the slot, but they've been more willing to put Chase inside with that extended space to work with, and now you plug in Burton, where that trio all of a sudden can be even scarier than it was the last few years. And with the other third rounder, they kept beefing up the defensive interior with Texas A&M's McKinley Jackson. A little early for me, loses his footing quite a bit after sliding off blocks and missed about 27% of tackles that he attempted last season. Not a whole lot in terms of cleanly winning as a pass rusher, but there's some tightness in his ankles trying to corner, and a lackadaisical spin move that he throws out there every once in a while, but consistently able to get out of his stance, bench press interior offensive linemen in the SEC, and then discarding them when the ball's in range. Impressive stoutness to anchor against double teams, and at times bear crawl forwards for stops in short yardage situations. And you do see him walk back guards into the quarterback's lap, or yank them aside when they lean too far into him at times. I just don't think he quite lived up to those physical tools we were promised coming out of high school as a former top 100 recruit, but he was named the team captain, and in run defense he could turn into that immovable object, as a shade knows by year 2 at least I think. Maybe more of a 2-down player at the NFL level, but with the guys they have at D-tackle now that I described earlier, I think this makes a lot of sense to get the type of skill set to complement them, even if I thought they could have still done it day 3 instead. Let me group the two tight ends from day 3 together here, with Eric All out of Iowa early in the 4th, and about 80 picks later Tanner McLaughlin of Arizona. All played in 2 pro-style rushing attacks at Michigan and Iowa, where he has experience with a variety of blocking schemes, gives you quality effort and force in his hands, whether he's widening the edge or wrapping around for a linebacker in the hole, but has some really intriguing skills as a receiver, being able to drop his hips and accelerate out of breaks, high punt the ball and instinctively turn away from defenders, adjust his path slightly and drive through one shoulder of tacklers. I don't think he's a prototypical wide necessarily, while having to be more proactive physically to fight off the hands of sticky man coverage, and not having as much of a side-by-side technique clapping at the ball. But the fact he went here, despite suffering back-to-back season-ending injuries and having back surgery, has me thinking the Bengals really liked him, while McLaughlin is built more like an oversized slot receiver, and the intrigue primarily is what he does as a 6'5", 240-pound pass catcher, has the speed to blow by linebackers as a seam runner, shows an excellent feel for where to find open space working against zone, frames the ball with consistent overhand technique, really tough to deal with big hits, and then his ability to start-stop after the catch to make defenders miss is pretty rare for tight ends. I personally believe he's underrated as a blocker, but he was often used on the move, but with only 31.5-inch arms and a smaller frame, you do see long strong edge defenders give him trouble when put on the point of attack. And whether it's getting bumped by linebackers or fighting for rebounding position, the lack of size does show up in certain areas as a receiver as well. But this just became a really interesting tight end room for Cincinnati that goes 4 names deep now, with free agent Mike Gesicki as your power forwards, Drew Sample does the dirty work stuff at the end of his rookie deal, and now you bring in these two guys. I think we see them go back to a little more 12 personnel, but now it's more about the tendency breakers than years in the past, but those guys can legitimately run routes and defenses need to guard the entire field. Going back to round 5 now with the guy they picked between those two tight ends and Josh Newton, the TCU corner, was looked at as a potential top 5 CB in this class a calendar year ago. I think we saw a lot of more flaws in his tape this season when his route anticipation took a slight step back, and we saw him get tested down the field more regularly, but running the low 4.5s and not taking advantage of making big plays on the ball in the air showed up. But if he can clean up his tackling a little bit, he can recreate some depth in the secondary for Cincy. I do like the balance and confidence off press, who advanced these with different jams and press techniques, pretty loose hips and ability to play look and lean against vertical routes, active communicator and zone coverage, pre and post snap, with good awareness for his landmarks and how route concepts play out, along with well coordinated footwork generally. And he's a sound run defender who takes his contained responsibility seriously. Gives them some inside out flexibility for a team that beyond the starting trio didn't have much to show for themselves. Then late in the 6th, Cedric Johnson of Ole Miss, big edge at 6'3", 260 pounds with broad shoulders and pretty long arms, violent run defender who stuns offensive linemen at contact when he locks out those arms against them, or stonewalls pulls in the backfield. Pretty good first step and bend for that size, who takes tight tracks to the passer, being able to lift the arms of blockers to create favorable angles for himself, or set up twists by exploding into bodies. Lacks a refined pass rush plan, accuracy with otherwise active hands, leading to him getting hung up with blockers, and he's not a great finisher, whether that's actually getting home against the passer or launching for tackles, with a 22% career miss rate, but look good going through the positional drills at the combine, to go with the explosiveness numbers around the 90th percentile along the edge. Very much in the mold of what the Bengals look for at that position, and with reports about Trey Hendrickson wanting to be traded, we're about to see a bigger sample size for last year's first round pick Miles Murphy. I think this makes a lot of sense, this late especially. And then two more guys in the 7th, first with the safety out of Ole Miss and Dejon Anthony. This was kind of the throwaway pick that the Texans ultimately threw in, trading for Joe Mixon as one of those deals where he's basically committed to going there if the Bengals cut him, but mid Houston at least toss something their way. For Anthony, urgently charges up the alley and has no issues throwing his body around in the run game, with continued improvements as a tackler, has quick feet to match routes from up close or playing from depth, redirects forward with a purpose to either attack the ball in the air or punch it out the catch point. His angles from depth can get pretty reckless, some receivers are able to get his feet stuck in quicksand it feels like, but giving him a stack near the top of the route. In dealing with more aggressive opponents, they're able to attack his frame and push off at times playing off. So with a much healthier safety room, I think this is more so a pick for special teams, and I'd be surprised if he sees the field a whole lot on defense as a rookie at least. And finally Matt Lee, the Miami center. Some people thought he could go a lot earlier based on the extensive experience, with 47 career starts between UCF and Miami last season. Wins as a run blocker with good angles and short area agility to get to plays at shoulder of the tackles on wide zone, as well as impressive dexterity to stay attached. Consistently is able to fit his hands into the guy across from him in pass pro, actively repositions, and is looking for work when he doesn't have a direct assignment, but weighing at just 288 pounds at least for a Shrine Bowl week, without a whole lot of functional mass that he can probably add. Because of that, you see him lean into contact as a run blocker and get rocked back by nose tackles, selling up for the bull rush at times. Not sure if there's a little bit too much missing in that department to really survive in the NFL long term, but as a depth piece in the 7th round, considering he did have a really good Shrine Bowl week, if you don't leave him in an island as the pivot, and you see those rugged guards next to him if he does have to step in, I actually like that quite a bit. So altogether a really strong class for Cincinnati. You get the tackle of the future up top, whether you want to end up with him on the left or right side, who is inexperienced but not raw, and has insane potential. You invest into what was a shockingly poor run defense last season, with Jenkins and Jackson on the interior D-line. Burton gives you insurance and flexibility, since it seems like this is Teagan's last year as a Bengal, and for this season, that trio when you go to big 11 personnel so to speak, will be pretty insane. But then you also get those two tight ends with skill sets you didn't really have on the roster yet. It could be really cool as a 12 personnel set, where you have options to not be predictable to the defense. After they ran the ball out of those looks at an obscene rate a couple of years ago still, before they embraced 3 wide receiver sets, some more depth on defense laid on the 3 with solid players. I think that all makes a ton of sense. We'll get to that at the end of this video, but you can tell I'm pretty bullish on what the Bengals were able to accomplish here, despite their somewhat rigid ways of sticking and picking, not maneuvering around the board, with a solid mix of guys that will contribute early, but also help you build around Joe Burrow in the future, as his extension starts to kick in, and you can't surround him with as many veterans anymore. Let's now move on to the Cleveland Browns, who didn't own the first round pick, still as part of the trade for Deshaun Watson a couple of years ago. But with the 6 selections that they made, they took in the second round 54th overall Michael Hall Jr., interior defensive lineman out of Ohio State, third round 85th overall Zach Zinter, interior O-line at Michigan, 5th round 156th overall Jamari Thrash, wide receiver Louisville, 6th round 206th overall Nathaniel Watson, linebacker Mississippi State, and then a couple of 7th rounders, 227th overall Miles Harden, cornerback South Dakota, and 233rd overall Juwan Briggs, interior defensive lineman out of Cincinnati. Starting with Ohio State D tackle Michael Hall, a little undersized at 6'2", 285 pounds, but that ability to line up on the shade of the guards and create disruption in a penetrating role really stands out, even though he's also become a steadier presence on the interior. Features one of the quickest club swim combos you're going to find, where you can also cross-face guards over setting on him that way, and whether it's becoming more forceful against soft sets and attacking the chest of linemen, or throwing out some wicked spin moves when guys open their shoulders with the outfield burst, he can challenge opponents through different avenues now. He does get dug up by angular blocks, and especially horizontally, you'll see him get rid of his landmarks quite significantly at times, and he gets caught dancing around with interior pass protectors, or just not staying on that short path to the passer as he tries to step around them. But I started to buy in a lot more of Hall watching him this past season compared to what I thought during the summer, and then had some really bright moments during Senior Bowl week. I thought Cleveland wanted to get a player like this, with how much defensive coordinator Jim Schwartz wants that D-line to pin the ace back and get up the field. Dalvin Tomlinson was the big signing for them as a one technique to complement that set of skill set last year, and even though Shelby Harris will probably start week 1, I see Hall being rotated in a lot and be a key piece in passing situations, where those one-on-ones he'll face could lead to some early production that they didn't see that way at Ohio State due to his usage. They go back in round 3 and get a guy who faced Hall quite a bit as part of the game, and Michigan guard Zach Zinter, who was put on this earth to play guard when you look at his thick build and the play demeanor he brings to the table, can create displacement on down blocks, inside zone and such, but he was the best puller in this entire draft, getting to his spots a lot quicker than you might expect based on his frame, and then just blowing up guys with that runway to build up momentum. While as a pass protector, he's patient with long arms that make it tough to get around him, and he wasn't called for a single penalty last season. He is built fairly top heavy at 6'6", and I didn't think he was a great fit for a wide zone based offense. While he's also not the most natural bender and struggles with quick twitch interior moves at times, which coming off a broken tibia and fibula in late November won't make things easier for him. That's why I was a bit surprised he didn't fall to day 3, since he'll probably miss most if not all of his rookie NFL season. But he was the 6th ranked interior O-lineman on tape alone for me, perfectly fits in with what Cleveland wants to do, as I think of somebody who back up Joel Bitonio and Wyatt Teller as an elite guard tandem that is however aging, and has massive cap hits in 2025 for over $50 million combined, so this gives them some flexibility down the road without a huge drop-off in play potentially. 5th round to get the Louisville receiver Jamari Thrash, rather slender build around 6 feet and a little over 180 pounds, and he comes with a lot of the limitations you'd expect, struggles with physicality during the route, fighting through contact as he's being walled off, had an abysmal 16% contested catch rate last season, and had too many passes go off his hands when he had to full extend for the ball. But this guy can absolutely fly and put fear into DBs in isolated situations, consistently threatens vertically off the snap, and keeps guys on their heels as he snaps off routes in front of them, sets up double moves exceptionally well, tracks the deep ball naturally, and works back to his quarterback to not allow defenders to swat passes away. Plus he's really elusive after the catch with great understanding for angles and how to navigate around traffic. Cleveland traded for and extended Jerry Jeudy this offseason, and also brought in Elijah Moore as an undersized receiver a year ago to go along with having drafted Cedric Tillman as more of your big-bodied X if they want to move Amari Cooper around. I think they look at Thrash as someone who can be a package player who clears out space with vertical speed and as a replacement for Moore a year from now maybe. In the 6th round they grabbed Nathaniel Bookie Watson, the Mississippi State linebacker. I really like this my number 9 player at the position in an otherwise underwhelming class, but I think he has started trades, and I wouldn't be shocked if he ends up starting next to Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, at least in 2025, with Jordan Hicks on a 1+1 deal basically. 6'2", 240 pounds with long arms, love the way he can create knockback, swipe away the hands of linemen, and the suddenness to navigate around traffic to make plays in the backfield. Yet he only missed just over 5% of his tackles last season as well. His ability to cover ground and the length project very well as a Tampa 2 dropper, takes good angles once the ball leaves the quarterback's hand, and then he led all linebackers in this draft with 35 pressures last season, being able to angle his blitzes, find vacant rush lanes, and close in on the quarterback. He needs to work on not getting his eyes burned in the backfield, playing a little low of contact being imminent, His height also leads to some clunkiness trying to change directions at times in coverage, and being a more reactionary move in space. But I think he plays quite a bit in pressure packages and could eventually take over that Mike spot a year from now. Bringing us to the 7th round, which the Browns actually got an additional pick here from the Titans for giving them a depth piece on the O-line by Leroy Watson, by the way. And I think they got themselves what could be a starting nickel for a few teams in Miles Harden out of South Dakota. Obviously not over former first round pick Greg Newsome, but this is a real player and one of our most fun watches during this draft cycle. Scrappy, highly competitive corner, but may move into the slot at pro level. Love his twitchiness to click and close on stuff in off coverage, but can also disrupt receivers off the line when asked to get up close, playing bigger than his size would indicate. Excellent eye balance and ability to midpoint routes in zone defense. Quickly slings receivers to the ground, and he battles blockers with sudden hands and aggressiveness when he needs to go through guys in the run or screen game. He's just on the short end for NFL standards with 4.5 speed, struggled with injuries during the better parts of 2021 and 2022. His route anticipation and how he leverages the ball could use some work, and it dives too much as a tackler, but a massive steal in the 7th round, I believe. And then I think they found another useful player even later in Jerome Briggs, the D tackle out of Cincinnati. Has massive quads and heavy hands on contact as a run defender, lining up all of the Bearcats front, being able to mirror the footwork of the O-line and 2-gap, or create stalemates when lined up on one shoulder of linemen. That leverage and force in his hands also serves him well as a pass rusher, working the depth of the pocket with the bull rush. And while he wasn't allowed to attack a whole lot in college based on his role, you saw the ability to win up the gap a few times during Shrine Bowl week, paired with excellent effort in his hands and just generally. His arms are just short of 32 inches, which leads to him not being able to maintain vision through blocks in the run game at times, as well as getting hung up around the line of scrimmage on passing downs, and we have yet to see him win with more than power as a pass rusher, which can lose some steam as blockers settle in for it. But this late, with what they have up front already, he may be on his practice squad early on, and then give you quality snaps the few times he's called upon this season, before potentially stepping into a more prominent role in 2025. So I personally thought Hall was a little bit early there at the end of the 2nd round, when they nearly had the choice of whichever linebacker they liked. I was surprised to see Zinter go in the 3rd, considering the injuries coming off, and I thought they could have maybe waited a little bit with the urgency on this roster, with where they are cap-wise, because he may not do anything for them this year. Thrash, I'm not sure how much he sees to fill this season, as he's probably wide receiver 6 for now. I did really like what they did otherwise on day 3, finding depth pieces who I believe have the capability of being real contributors by 2025. So not 100% sure this is the way I expected them to go in the draft. And in terms of how much Cleveland gets from them this year, it's kind of a make or break season for a quarterback they handed the most guaranteed money to a couple of seasons ago still. Even with the consideration of them not having a first rounder, they may not get a ton of snaps out of this group overall, but it's not like I dislike any of the guys that they brought in here. Let's transition to the team, however, that I started my big draft recap with as one of the big winners in the Pittsburgh Steelers, who started the draft with a couple of picks on the O-line, 1st round 20th overall Troy Fautanu, offensive tackle Washington, and 2nd round 51st overall Zach Frazier, interior offensive lineman of West Virginia, a couple of 3rd rounders 84th overall Roman Wilson, wide receiver Michigan, and 98th overall Peyton Wilson, a linebacker NC State. Then in the 4th round, 119th overall, they go back to the O-line with Mason McCormick, interior O-lineman out of South Dakota State, and a couple of 6th rounders, 178th overall Logan Lee, interior defensive line Iowa, and 195th overall Ryan Watts, the cornerback / safety out of Texas. Starting up top with Fautanu, urgent out of his stance to raise the space towards defensive linemen on angular blocks, has the short area quicks to execute scoop blocks on the backside of wide zone, but also really well coordinated to get to extended landmarks and come to balance as a puller or in the screen game. Really easy move and pass protection to change up his footwork and throw out some different technical adjustments without looking uncomfortable. Whether needs to calm his feet as guys try to get him to overreact, has to get rushers to commit with fake stabs, or redirect laterally to work through twists, there's a lot to like there. Not an overpowering run blocker, I'd say, with rather short strides. And there are some issues where he's going to lift up the post foot, getting outreached even if his arms are above NFL standards, and allows himself to get caught grabbing cloth, leading to 14 flags against him over the past 2 seasons. But man, I thought this guy could easily have gone 10th overall to the Jets. He only started at left tackle pretty much for the Huskies, but he's such a natural athlete and has the mirror skills to potentially play all 5 spots in the O-line at points of his career. They did announce him as a tackle, and I think he takes over on the blind side for Chuck Okorafor, having left him for agency, then finally being over Denmore Jr., and with the next pick at center and Zach Frazier out of West Virginia, they kind of made that decision of Fautanu sticking over there on the blind side. Frazier brings excellent snap-to-step quickness and is able to cover plenty of ground laterally and outside zone, while his experience to make adjustments on the fly of when to overtake, stay thick on doubles, climb, it's basically flawless already. You see his wrestling background show up in the way he can create leverage points, torque bodies to the right hip, but also anchor against power in the pass game. And generally he's patient with his hands, keeps those elbows in tight, and doesn't let go anymore once those paws are attached, which is how he didn't allow any sacks and just 7 QB pressures and over 350 pass blocking snaps last season. He's not a special athlete and only just hit 32 inches in terms of the arm length, to give him a little less room for error, and there's reason to believe Frazier may struggle in a protection scheme where he's more on an island against twitchy interior pass rushers in the NFL. However, as I think about this guy's fit with the new offensive coordinator Arthur Smith, it's a hand and glove situation for sure. He immediately jumps in over Nate Herbig, who has been a career backup on the interior, and is exactly what they need as they transition to more of an outside zone oriented approach. That's also kind of why they didn't pick up the 50 option on Najee Harris. Pittsburgh hasn't had a real solution in the middle of the O-line for a while now, and I think Frazier could be the next in line as far as the great players they've had at that spot. A couple of Wilsons in the third round, first up with Roman Wilson, the wide receiver out of Michigan, subtle with the way he gets off the line and already displays impressive detail as a route runner, being able to tempo, burst out of his breaks and find green grass versus zone. Whether he's sitting stuff down or maneuvers around ancillary defenders, he was often the solution when this time needed to complete passes versus static looks or win one-on-one, especially in designated passing situations. And then his soft hands combined with a bigger catch radius than his frame would indicate, with zero delay to get up the field after the catch. Plenty of his production came in part thanks to advantages that he got through free releases and hiding him behind stacks, where I'm not sure what happens if guys can actually lay hands on him, and unless he's catching a cross they can run with it, he doesn't create a lot of yards after the catch or misses forced tackles necessarily, with only 2 on 48 receptions last season. When the Steelers get a receiver in the middle rounds, you better pay attention with their history, and I did have Wilson tied for 10th in my wide receiver rankings, as someone who could have easily gone 30 spots higher. As I think about George Pickens as a big X profile, who wins on slants, posts and fades, Van Jefferson at least for the Rams used more down the field as well, even though I thought he was more capable of a complete route tree coming out of college. But Wilson on the slots, being able to win on option routes, run those shallow crossers, find watered space versus zone, I think he's going to be productive right away, in part because of his investment and effectiveness as a blocker that doesn't make the coaching staff shy away from putting him on the field early on. And then Peyton Wilson, the NC State linebacker. Pittsburgh had that extra third as part of the Kenny Pickett deal, moving up 22 spots from 120, and one of a couple of 7th rounders next year that they got from Philly. And with the first of those, they got a player who purely based on the tape grade was a late first rounder for me and many others. Whether he has to track plays laterally, shoot through a crease, sort through traffic or scrape over the action, this guy makes a bunch of tackles versus the run. Wilson has the wheels to run with tight ends or running backs, even as they turn routes up the field, while being sudden and capable of reducing his near shoulder to crash through the reach of pass protectors. And then he just plays with his hair on fire, constantly chasing after the ball and making plays way outside his range when he wasn't even on the screen at times when you look at the broadcast angles. The big issue or worry with Wilson, of course, is his extensive injury history, with 2 torn ACLs and a season-ending shoulder surgery across 5 years with the Wolfpack. And he does have more of a narrow frame, which he struggles to keep clean and deal with linemen if he allows them to get close into him and take away the vision to the ball. Some people believe that this is a one-contract player, and considering he barely heard his name called at the end of day 2, there may be some legitimacy to that if he can't stay healthy, but right now this guy's an immediate starter and energizing bunny for the Steelers D. That's very much in line with the guy that they signed from the division rival Ravens and Patrick Queen. It's in a different way than what he and Roquan Smith did in Baltimore, but Queen crashing into bodies and having Wilson next to it to clean up more so with his speed, while they can both be used going forward or back and passing downs, I really like that pairing. Then in the 4th round they went back to the O-line with Mason McCormick, the guard out of South Dakota State. Just an ass kicker in the run game with the way he fires out of his stance and is able to dig guys out of the gap vertically or horizontally, while being a sledgehammer when used as a puller. Being built like a brick wall, having those cinder blocks for hands, and the way he can read rushers, countering a myriad of rush moves, he's really tough to get around. And then he's had a nearly flawless pre-draft process, where his relative athletic score was top 10 all time for guards, and he was just shutting everybody down during Shrine Bowl practices. You do see him launch himself into defenders and slip off too many blocks against FCS competition already. I do think, despite of what he's shown during those All-Star events, his feet are a little heavy, where he was rarely tested at the edges of his frame by twitchy interior rushers. To me, however, this was a top 100 player in the draft, and someone ready to start right now in the NFL. I don't think he does in Pittsburgh over Isaac Samalu or James Daniels, but as a backup and swing guy who they could weaponize on the move as part of the run game packages, and then he takes over for either one of those guys next year, that's an awesome pick. And he's super smart, having him responsible for protections due to having a young center next to him this past season at SDSU, to where they can trust him right away. Logan Lee, the Iowa D lineman, gets to stay in the black and yellow, very much in the mold of what the Steelers have had for years as rotational players, able to lock out and stand his ground in the run game with a high level of activity and lateral mobility to work off blocks, brings the force to crash from one shoulder of pass protectors on the interior, and has a knack for yanking guys off himself in order to flash up the pocket later in the down. He works hard but ends up getting hung up on blocks for too long at stretches, without the suddenness to contort his body and find escape paths, and he needs to do a better job of stepping past the hip of interior pass protectors when he does defeat the hands in order to not allow guys to still slide in front of him, as he ends up moving a lot laterally instead. I think he provides good depth and has room upwards as a former tight end convert, but maybe not ever anything beyond that. And finally, Ryan Watts, the defensive back out of Texas, big strong outside corner with 34.5-inch arms, who some people have talked about him moving to safety. Did play a lot of soft press, but can also disrupt guys off the line, staying locked in on the hips of receivers, and being able to decelerate a lot better than you'd expect for a guy at 6'3", 210 pounds. Good spatial awareness as a zone defender, and with his length it's tough to lay the ball over him, and he strikes blockers on the edge while having continued to work on his tackling, with only one miss on 40 attempts last season. He does get pretty grabby at the top of the routes and will be penalized more regularly at the next level, especially those sudden guys that can really give him trouble. While you like his willingness to peek back for the ball down the field, he's rarely in position to quite get his hands on it, and only 9 PBUs to his credit, with no experience at safety as some people suggested. But as a backup to Joey Porter Jr., who can challenge bigger wideouts, which I've already discussed, like a T. Higgins, and press, maybe as a tight end matchup piece down the line, what he can provide on special teams, I don't mind it at all this late in the draft. In conclusion, just an awesome haul for Pittsburgh, clearly in the conversation for the best draft of any team in the league no matter how you spin it. The biggest story I believe for them, and I tweeted this out once they completed the trio of Fatanu, Frazier, and McCormick, they've rebuilt the O-line in a way where they were a bottom 3 unit in the NFL like 15 months ago still, and now they have a chance to be one of the very best once these guys have a season under their belt. That's just astonishing. They've created flexibility for themselves by getting the best 5 guys out there right now, as well as how they manage contracts by the veterans that they currently still have there, and I think they can recreate that identity around running the ball, now having more out of structure playmaking from the quarterback position, whether Russell Wilson or Justin Fields wins that job, and when healthy, this is still a defense that can wreak a lot of havoc. I love the combination of the guys in the 3rd round, with a steady Eddie slot receiver in Roman Wilson, and arguably the top linebacker if we take out the medical concerns in Peyton Wilson, plus a couple of depth pieces very much in line with the guys that they value in those spots late. Couldn't have done a whole lot better, and they didn't panic whether it was a run on tackles or receivers, but rather let the board come to them and hit on value picks throughout all 3 days. Phenomenal work. That once again brings us to the divisional draft ranking segment, and as you can probably tell from me waxing poetic about what he did here, the Steelers are atop the list. I won't waste too much time at this point, since I just broke down why I loved what they did here, but the overarching point being the commitment to rebuilding the offensive line and finding valid selections without having to move up for them. Just back-to-back phenomenal drafts for them. Then the Bengals would at least be in competition for the top spot in many other divisions. I thought they knocked it out of the park with the first 3 selections, finding a guy I believe has the potential to emerge as the top offensive tackle in a historically great class in Amaris Mims, my 3rd ranked interior D lineman, who really boosts the run defense in Chris Jenkins Jr., going a notch later than a bunch of other guys at the position who I think have more questions, and they clearly are comfortable with the guy, since there's no reason to not love the play of Jermaine Burton, who juices up the wide receiver room and eventually should replace T. Higgins as someone who can be a number 2 in this league I believe. Then taking a couple of shots at tight ends, with number 6 and 7 for me personally in my positional rankings, and then re-establishing depth along the defense, a really strong draft. Baltimore comes in 3rd for me, a little bit of a drop off because I questioned a couple of the first 4 selections, but as I described, there are avenues where those guys definitely pay off down the line, and then as always they found awesome value picks in the mid to late rounds, along with my number 2 corner Nate Wiggins, who other than a slimmer frame that you may question long term, has all the makings of a superstar player, lots of vacant spots to fill, and while a couple of those may come with some growing pains, I thought they found ways to address those without going out of their way to do so, while getting the Iowa State corner TJ Tampa at the end of the 4th round, being up there for the biggest steal of the entire draft. Finally, Cleveland comes in 4th, I discussed my concerns around the haul that they put together here, maybe not being set up to give them a lot of snaps and big time production in this crucial year, with the defense being an aggression candidate just by the nature of how that side of the ball works, and then finally needing Deshaun Watson to look anything like a franchise quarterback. I thought the two Big Ten guys that they got on day 2 on the interior O and D line respectively could be impact starters by 2025, as they're forced to cut ties with guys next off season, and they brought in guys on all 3 levels of the defense from the 6th round onwards who have traits to become impact contributors long term. This is just more about where I see them in terms of team building life cycle, so to speak, which I'm not really sure if I agree what they did here. That brings us to the end of a second video from the series, however, first time visiting the AFC. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the insight, I would really appreciate if you could press that thumbs up button for me, and if you consider subscribing for more of these if this is your first time on the channel. Also, letting a friend know is always great for everybody involved. As always, you can find all of my work in written form over at hellofootballtalk.com. Link is down below in the description, along with all my social media handles, where I post whenever I have something coming out, stuff happening around football, and happily talk to you guys. Of course, you can leave any feedback, topics for discussion, or questions in the comment section. I hope to see you back here next week for the NFC and AFC East. Have a great weekend. So, until then, see you later. Peace!